Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Jon nodded quietly. Yes, it saved my life. Tyrion turned to Daenerys. And you did know of this. How long? She smiled, knowingly. Sometime. The dwarf nodded in awe, his gaze wandering between him and Daenerys. It was as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he did keep it to himself, urging them to drink too. The Honorable Eddard Stark. To this, Jon gladly agreed. They arrived in White Harbor in the morning, even if it was hard to tell what time of the day it was. Since leaving Dragonstone, where they gathered all the dragon glass they could get, the days grew bleaker and shorter. The sky was a constant somber gray, and it was hard to imagine that in the south there was once sunshine and warmth. After several days full of storms, Jon was galled to put his feet back on the northern ground. Even Sir Davos, who Jon knew was well used to harsh sea travel, seemed more than relieved to leave the ship behind him. Tormund looked more settled this time, though Jon could see he was more than eager to finally get back to his people. Jon could understand him. The time in the south cost him enough time, and he had feared upon his return he would find the north already vanquished by the White Walkers. Now he was back with a well enough army. Of course it proved not easy to convince Daenerys' allies, for most of them thought of the White Walkers as mere fairy tales for children. They were ready enough to support Daenerys to gain revenge against the Lannister queen, but sending their soldiers into Hebaran North full of barbarians was not something most of them liked to hear. Of course they could not outrightly refuse the future queen, who had dragons at her disposal. Not to mention many of them were tired of war and strife. So in the end, Willis Tyrell provided 12,000 men. The Stormlands, some 3,000, and Daenerys her best Dothraki riders. And 1/3 of her unsullied. Of course they had to be fitted with warmer clothing first, which took them another half moon to accomplish. Now several moons were gone, and according to Sansa's last letter, she was fine and would be prepared for their arrival. Jon knew it would be hard to lodge all those men, but somehow he felt the battle was not far away. Without the wall, they would have killed us long ago. White Harbor was like Jon remembered it, when he visited it on his travel south. It was still a well-ordered town, with wide straight cobbled streets and houses built of whitewashed stone. As Lord Manderly was aware of their coming, it was no surprise the Lord expected them already, and nothing had changed about the Lord. Despite the coming of winter, he still had his massive girth, and granted Jon one of his good-humored smiles. Welcome to White Harbor. With him was, of course, his younger son Wendell, and his two daughters Winifred and Willa. I thank you, Lord Manderly, Jon wanted to reply, but not even a word was out of his mouth, as the Lord turned his attention to Daenerys. It is of course a pleasure to greet you here, your grace, he piped out and kissed Daenerys' slender hand. Daenerys smiled brightly, although she seemed a bit surprised by the open friendliness of the Lord. Lord Umber and many others would have probably snickered over the man's eager display of friendliness to a Targaryen, but Jon knew he was doing it for his sake. He handled 3 years under Bolton rule without losing his head by playing along and smiling. No, he was no fool, but knew how to survive. Thank you for receiving us so kindly, Lord Manderly, she replied politely. The Lord seemed satisfied by her answer and turned his attention back to Jon, who was now joined by Arya and Lady Jane. As always, Arya was dressed in her beloved leather and would have easily been mistaken for a boy if it wasn't for her shoulder-length braided hair. From the speechless look of the Lord, Jon deduced he realized who the girl before him was. Jon smiled. As you can see, my sister Arya also returned with us, he explained, and it took the Lord a moment to get his wits back. He spread his hands wide and granted Arya a jolly smile. Of course you are all Ned's girl. The same eyes and the same hair, he remarked, and kissed Arya's hand as well. Arya complied out of politeness, but from the burning in her eyes, Jon knew she would have liked to make him stop. Welcome home, the Lord added, and Arya took her hand back as fast as possible once the greeting was done. At last, the helpless look of Jane found Jon, and he knew the lady would not dare to speak out of her own accord. And this here is Lady Jane Stark, my late brother's wife, he said loudly, so the Lord would not overhear him. If the Lord was surprised, he did not show it like he did with Arya. Instead, he showed her a calm politeness devoid of the jolly laughter he had shown Daenerys. Jon knew this beforehand, but Jane did deserve to see the North if she so wished, and he would not tolerate impoliteness to the lady. Was it wrong of his brother to marry the Jane? Maybe, but what right did Jon have to judge his brother? Jon himself broke his vows with Ygritte. Be welcome here, Lady Stark, he replied, more friendly, as he saw Jon's open affection for the late widow. Fresh snow fell as they made their way to Newcastle, the seat of House Manderley. Lord Manderley had a small feast prepared for them. Jon wished he would have refrained from doing so, but he was still king, and he could not be ungrateful to the man. The feast was held in the famously known Merman's Court, a large hall with floors and ceilings made of wooden planks notched together and decorated with all kinds of fearsome creatures of the sea. As the guests of honor, Daenerys sat on the high table with Lord Tyrion to her right and Lord Manderley next to the small lord. Next to her sat Jon with Arya, Lady Jane, and of course, Gendry, who at first didn't even want to get from the ship. Only with Sir Davos goading did he finally get down to introduce himself. Daenerys seemed to observe everything with keen interest, and even laughed at the japes Lord Manderley was throwing at her. The Daenerys from their first meeting would have never acted like this with a northern lord, Jon realized. Even the food seemed to be to her taste. Eel, crabs and lobster, with all kinds of sweet paste and broth. "It seems to be to your liking?" Jon asked, slightly amused by the way she clumsily tried to take apart that crab. It was still strange how he felt now more comfortable in her presence. Daenerys herself seemed more jovial too. She smiled much more, and not one of those fake smiles she carried when playing her role of queen. No, it seemed the defeat of the Lannister queen took away some of the pressure weighing on her shoulders. She gave him a good-humored smile and looked a little embarrassed. "Well, I am used to all kinds of food. I lived with the Dothraki for some time, and they eat horse balls. Once I even ate the heart of a horse all raw and bloody," she replied jokingly. Jon grimaced at that. A raw heart from a horse? Not even Hob the cook of the Night's Watch would have served them anything as ghastly as this. Arya looked slightly impressed. "And why would you eat that?" she asked, leaning forward to get a better look at Daenerys. Daenerys grinned. "Well, it was some ritual, the Dothraki like rituals, which include fighting and eating raw meat," she explained. "And when did they eat horse balls?" Jaime asked timidly. Daenerys laughed, pouring herself some ale, before answering. "Well, they think it grants them prowess in bed," she remarked, and Arya rolled her eyes as if it was the most ridiculous thing she ever heard, while Lady Jane giggled with embarrassment. After another dish, more black beer was served. White Harbor was quite famous for it, and Jon remembered his father ordered it once for the feast he held in honor of King Robert. Thinking back at this time made him put away the beer for a moment. Soon most men, and especially Lord Manderley, seemed well into their cups. And even Jon felt his mind grow a little hazy. Lord Manderley even had a minstrel attend to his guests. It was the same one who played at Lady Ath's wedding ceremony, and who was now apparently a permanent guest at Lord Manderley's court. Jon never had much interest in music or songs. Especially dancing was nothing he would consider himself talented in. Robes could dance well enough, but Jon never had a talent for it. Lady Axley even chided him for it on her wedding. No, that was only something Sansa loved, he mused as the short, sturdy man started to play the bear in the maiden fair. However, what surprised him a little was how much the music seemed to captivate Daenerys. She sat all still and listened with a content smile on her lips, as the minstrel performed one song after another. When she saw him staring, she flushed a little, and brushed a loose strand out of her face. "Cerebar Stenselmi told me once my brother Rhaegar loved singing. He said he had the most heavenly voice," she explained with a small smile. But there was also sadness hidden there. Jon knew about his true father's gift for the harp, but he never considered it more than an occupation for leisure. "Well, I certainly lack any such talent for music." Jon poured down the bitter beer and made an attempt to change the topic as he feared a wrong word might slip out of his mouth. "Well, this minstrel isn't bad either," he remarked, and Daenerys nodded in silence, but seemed a little disappointed by his answer. Jon wondered if she was trying to see his blood father in him. The thought made him sad, for he felt like there was nothing Targaryen-like about him. "Well, I am a bit of a disappointment to you, right? No silver hair and purple eyes," he mused ironically, turning his attention back to the song. It was a song he did not know. It was both sad and sweet to the ears, and the singer conveyed both tones well. Sansa would have certainly called it lovely. "Life is brief, fall in love, maidens. Before the crimson fades from your lips, before the tides of passion cool within you. For those of you who know no tomorrow." Hesitatingly, he dared to look back at Daenerys, who listened attentively, her eyes shining with emotions. It was also the first time in a long time that he really took a closer look at her, for his mind had been mainly occupied with coming home. She looked different. Her dress was made of a warmer cloth, almost wool-like, and of a gray-blue color. Around her shoulders she had a snow-white pelt, and her usually long silver hair was braided and wound around her head. It was simple and similar to how the northern ladies like to wear their hair. "Stop staring, you fool," he reminded himself, but failed. Something about this song made him ponder his life and evoked some emotions he hoped to bury away forever. Life is brief, fall in love maidens. Before his hands take up his boat, before the flush of his cheeks fades, for those of you who will never return here, like the scorn Lady Stark held for him and the pain it caused him, the envy he held for Robb for being heir, his hope for companionship in the Night's Watch and his hopeless entanglement with Yurdi. I did my duty and they murdered me. He tried to forget the pain those memories caused him, but he could not quite achieve it no matter how hard he tried. He gripped the table tightly as if it would relieve him of the painful memories, but it failed. Sometimes at night, he still saw Ollie's face dance before his eyes, thrusting the dagger into his heart. I died and came back. But for what? This he had asked himself 1,000 times in the last moons. Was it just a whim of this Lord of Light worshipped by the Red Woman? How long until he takes away his gift again? Jon wondered. Life is brief indeed, he realized bitterly, as the first repeating strophe of the song rose again in a mixture of sweetness and melancholy. Life is brief, fallen love maidens, before the boat drifts away on the waves, before the hand resting on your shoulder becomes frail, for those who will never be seen here again. Life is brief. He breathed deeply and felt a distant ache in his chest, where his scars littered his body. For the watch they had whispered before they plunged their daggers into his chest. It still made his hair stand at his back. You are the prince that was promised born amid salt and smoke, he remembered the words of the Red Woman. Maybe it was all meant to be like this, he thought, that I would bring Daenerys here. And then he wondered. Moons ago it was all so clear. He would bring Daenerys and her dragons north and defeat the White Walkers. He never thought what would come after this. He had not even considered death and thought of the terrible blackness which awaited him there. It made him freeze in terror, and he did not even recognize how the last strophe was played. Life is brief, fall in love maidens, before the raven tresses begin to fade, before the flame in your hearts flicker and die, for those to whom today will never return. Life is brief. Then silence reigned for a moment before clapping could be heard, and Jon realized it was the last song played tonight. He looked up and realized Daenerys was giving him a worried look. "Are unwell?" she asked with raised eyebrows, and Jon could only smile weakly in return. Nothing is well, he thought, and he felt a little bit like a fool. "I am well," he said, more coldly than he intended, and excused himself. It was also the first time in days they could all properly bath. Yet, despite the warm bath and the food, he could not quite find any sleep. His scars were hurting him, or maybe it was just his imagination. So to get a clear head, he wandered to the place where a Stark would always find some solace and comfort. The Godswood. The trees with their white bark stood silent as a cold biting wind whirled snowflakes into the air. It calmed his mind, watching the crying faces, even as a child. "Bran, are you watching?" "There you are," someone startled him after some time. It was Daenerys. He tried to give her a friendly smile, but failed. "How did you know I would be here?" he asked, instead. She laughed. "Ario knows you quite well," was all she replied, and stepped closer. Then she grew more serious. "Did I say something that offended you tonight?" she finally asked after a moment of silence. Jon was a little startled by her question. "No, of course not," he replied. "What makes you think that?" She looked slightly relieved and drew another step closer. "I don't know. After I mentioned my brother, you grew all broody again. Sauer Davos even remarked it reminded him how you were shortly after you left the Night's Watch and your, resurrection, or so he called it." He noticed her doubt about this resurrection. Not that he judged her for it. Saintsa could barely believe it when he told her, and only when he showed her his scars did she really believe him. "My scars hurt," he finally said, and she pursed her lips and folded her arms in front of her. "So it is all true, then? I was not only a story?" she asked, her eyes shining with curiosity. He laughed tiredly. "Yes, it is all true. They killed me, and the Red Woman burned me. However, instead of turning to ashes, I came back," he replied, not looking at her. "Fire cannot kill a dragon," she muttered quietly, as if it was prayer, and he looked up, giving her a confused look. Then he realized what she meant, and laughed before pulling the glove from his once-burned hand, showing it to her. "It was only once, before this fire harmed me like any person, as you can see," he told her. But she seemed not bothered by what she said. "It is magic, then. Like when I woke my dragons from stone," she told him and touched his burned hand carefully. It made him feel all warm and forget the coldness and the pain in his chest. "Yes, Maybe it was magic. Winterfell was a castle of gray stone with high towers and massive walls covered in a cloth of white snow. Daenerys was impressed as she led her horse in front of the long procession. Winterfell was built by Brandon the Builder thousands of years ago. She remembered Tyrion's words. This castle felt like ripped right out of a fairy tale story for children. Or more like stories to scare children, she mused when thinking about the White Walkers. She looked up at the sky, which was still dark, despite being way past midday, and it was not getting any better. It only grew colder every day. Even at night, wrapped up in her warm pelts, she felt cold and longed to crawl on Drogon's warm back. She also recalled the snowstorm they experienced shortly before leaving King's Landing and wondered if this darkness had already reached the south. The Maesters wrote it would be the coldest winter in 1,000 years. Are those truly the first signs for the coming of the long night, as Ye and Jon called it? She felt a little like a fool now and became more restless as they drew closer to Winterfell. She certainly did not think of Jon as a man who would lie to her, but even to her it was hard to believe such creatures could actually exist. And now, as more and more signs of winter are becoming apparent, it was harder to ignore this reality. And those White Walkers, or what did Arya call them? The others. The others, thousands and thousands of years ago, a winter fell that was cold and hard and endless beyond all memory of man. There came a night that lasted a generation, and kings shivered and died in their castles. Women smothered their children rather than see them starve, and when they cried, their tears would freeze on their cheeks. This story Arya shared with her a few nights ago, after Daenerys asked for some stories about the North. The way the girl told the story made her freeze even more. And to think I will send my children against those creatures, still I gave a promise and will not flee. If I look back, I am lost. You looked tired, Your Grace, Jon remarked, not unkindly. Like his sister Arya, he wore a thick brown pelt and looked all at home in those harsh lands full of snow and ice. She tried to smile despite the fact that her face felt like going numb from the icy wind. To be honest, I didn't really get much sleep. The cold is creeping into my bones. I experienced many a cold night as I rode with the Dothraki. But this cold is different. It is true what they say about the North. If hunger doesn't kill you up here, winter certainly will, if it doesn't freeze your balls off first, she replied in an attempt to lighten up the atmosphere. Jon's expression changed to a hesitant smile. She felt a little proud of herself for having achieved such a feat. Sam said something similar when he came to the wall. He remarked, "Sam?" she asked with curiosity. Jon usually only talked about his family, but hardly about the Night's Watch. She knew it was a sore point he preferred to avoid due to his death by the hands of his brothers. "Was he a friend of yours?" she asked. Jon's face did not change, its expression. There was still a little smile playing on his lips, so she concluded this man was not one of those who betrayed him. "Samwell Tarly joined shortly after I came to the Wall. He is one of my oldest friends and is now in Old Town. He trains to replace the late Master Raymond," he explained. At the mention of her granduncle, she grew a little sad, but she brushed it away. After all, Tarly was a familiar name to her. "Tarly, is he the son of—" she wanted to ask, but Jon gave a sharp nod. "Yes, he forced him to join the Night's Watch on Sword Point. Forgive me if I don't like the man very much," Jon admitted, and Daenerys remembered the serious demeanor of the man. A true warrior with a heart of stone. This was the impression she had of the man. "Does he know what happened to you?" she dared to ask, and realized her question made Jon still uncomfortable despite their talk. Back in White Harbor, for his smile turned back to his guarded expression immediately after her question. She shivered a little as a moment of silence passed between them and the harsh wind ruffled the trees around them. Jon led his horse closer to her. "No, thanks to the gods he did not have to see it," he replied, his words almost a whisper against the wind. Daenerys shivered again, but this time because his eyes seemed almost black now. "I am sorry I shouldn't have asked," she said, touching his arm hesitatingly. Still, he did not move away from her touch, and she felt comforted by this. "Does it frighten you?" he asked. Then his face twisting in pained expression. At first she did not quite know what he meant, but then she realized he was referring to White Harbor. She felt her cheeks grow warm, but not from the cold. The words of Tyrion flittered through her head. "A marriage is certainly the best solution, Your Grace," he advised her, just as she expected, after Jon told him about his mother. Yet Tyrion did not know that she was probably barren and will never be able to hold a child in her arms. "No, I am the mother of dragons," she reminded herself. "Also my moon blood returned when I was wandering through the Dothraki Sea," she continued her line of thought. "If Jon Snow can rise from death, Why shouldn't it be possible? The old hag lied to her. Your Grace, Jon snapped her out of her thicket of thoughts as his gloved hand touched her arm. She smiled back at him, her lips feeling dry from the cold. You might not believe me, but I have seen a lot of strange things while traveling through Essos. I am not afraid of you, she told him with a little more determination. It seemed to work, for he looked slightly relieved by her words. Yet she was not sure if it was enough. It still felt as if there was a perpetual shadow hanging over him. Maybe coming home will cure him of it. Mayhaps you will tell me about those strange things one day, Your Grace, he asked, and Daenerys felt herself wince. Not the first time these days by the mention of her title. At times she even forgot what her true name was. Then a thought came to her, and she pursed her lips into a smile. You know this Your Grace here and Your Grace there gets quite tedious the more often it is used. If you wish you may call me Daenerys, or if you prefer Dany. That is what they called me when I was a child. Jon was silent for a brief moment, but then he smiled again. Gunning is not a name associated with luck up here in the north, he remarked. And Daenerys flashed him a confused look in return. We have a sad story in the Night's Watch about a girl named Dany Flint who dressed herself up as a boy and joined the Night's Watch. The story ended with her being murdered and raped by her black brothers, he replied, and Daenerys wondered if Jon had been born with a hidden gift to sadden everything around him. But strangely, she was not bothered by his words. My brother was known to be very melancholic. Mayhaps he has more of Rhaegar than he thinks. She flashed him a wide smile in an attempt to banish away the sadness. Well then, it is Daenerys, and I will call you Jon, if you wish. He was struck silent for a moment. Then he nodded his dark eyes, shining with emotions, which made her heart flutter fast. Of course, if you wish, he replied. And his gaze lingered a bit longer on her than usual. However, then he tore his gaze away from her and grabbed the rein of his horse tighter. Daenerys realized then how close they were to Winterfell. Beneath them was a small town with the high walls of the castle looming over it like a comforting protection against the harsh winter. The small folk gawked curiously at the procession of Dothraki, knights, Northmen, and Unsullied. As Drogon appeared, some of them nearly collapsed in terror, while children clung to their mothers' skirts. A dragon! Some of them exclaimed and pointed at the sky, while others covered their faces in fear. Only when Jon rode forward with the banner of House Stark fluttering behind him did they grow calmer. All the while she kept her attention fixed on her two dragons ready to step in, should they intend to frighten the small folk. Finally, they rode through the large gate, leaving behind the chilly road outside. Inside the castle, a group of people awaited them. It seems they awaited our arrival. In the front stood a tall young woman with bright auburn hair and a young boy at her side. Like the young woman, he had the same auburn hair and blue eyes. Sansa and Rickon Daenerys tried to remember their names correctly. The oldest sister and the youngest brother, or was he named Bran? No, the one who can't walk is named Bran. Sansa seemed frozen in shock as her eyes darted to her younger sister, Arya, who crawled down from her horse. It is really true. You are alive, Sansa said, mist building in front of her mouth. Tears were shining in her eyes, and she seemed to be afraid to get closer, as if she felt her sister would disappear the moment she touched her. However, all the hesitation seemed to melt away as Arya flashed her one of her impish grins and embraced her older sister tightly. I am so sorry for what I said and did. I was so stupid, the older sister rambled on and on. After some time, Arya let go of her sister and rubbed at her own red-rimmed eyes. I don't want to think of the past anymore, Arya answered, and her sister smiled tearfully at her words. They are really unlike each other, Daenerys realized. One was tall and lithe, wearing a dress, while the other was short and dressed in leather. Jon joined them and gave them both a hug before moving towards his younger brother, who whispered something about dragons. After the reunion was done, Jon turned back to Daenerys. May I introduce Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, he introduced. And the oldest girl's gaze darted to Daenerys, mustering her a little. For a brief moment, he was quiet, but then she bowed and broke into a polite smile. You are of course welcome here in Winterfell, Your Grace, she greeted, and Daenerys returned her polite smile. Arya only rolled her eyes at the display of politeness. It is also good to see you again, Lady Stark, Tyrion greeted, flashing the young woman a cheeky smile. The lady seemed surprised by his appearance, but she smiled nonetheless. It seems she liked the fact that Tyrion called her Lady Stark. It is good to see you again, Lord Tyrion, she returned politely. Tyrion seemed satisfied by her answer. Right behind Tyrion were Jeyne and the Hound. Jeyne looked a little pale, while the Hound was hardly visible under the thick hood he wore over his face. Jane seemed struck speechless, and so Daenerys took it upon herself to break the silence. "There is someone else who wishes to meet you, Lady Stark," she told Lady Sansa. Daenerys urged Jane forward, who complied only after a brief moment of hesitation. As she saw her face closer, she felt a little guilty, for Jane looked very tense, and her eyes were all watery. "May I introduce Lady Jane Stark, late wife of our brother Robb Stark? Lord Tyrion found her captive in Casterly Rock, and we brought her here so she might be able to see Winterfell. I hope it is not an inconvenience for you, my lady." A moment of silence passed between the two women before Sansa spoke a word that broke the ice. "Be welcome here, of course. I almost forgot. Jon wrote about you," she said, a bit brought out of her perfect pose. She seemed not angry, though, and more surprised. "I am truly sorry what happened to Robb," Jane finally said, tears shining in her eyes. All eyes were now on the two girls. Sansa stepped forward and kissed the girl on the cheek. "Nonsense. You are part of the family, and if anyone here makes you feel unwelcome, I will have them punished," she whispered to the girl, who laughed. At this, the Hound laughed and pulled his hood down, revealing his ugly, burnt face. "It seems you have really changed quite a bit, little bird," he joked. Lady Sansa seemed little surprised by his sudden appearance, as if she had been aware of him all the time. "Well, he is hard to oversee." She also seemed amused by his remark. "Well, it seems you have not changed at all, good sir," she replied in a chiding manner, which made the Hound chuckle. "Have you forgotten that I am no knight?" he asked, and she nodded in understanding silence. Then she turned back to the rest of them and clapped her hands together. "Now let us eat. It is only a small feast, but I hope it will be enough for your grace." "I don't mind," Daenerys returned. Daenerys felt suddenly much warmer, and it seemed the chill was finally gone from her bones. She knew this people hardly a few moments, but she felt strangely protective over them. The White Walkers might be lurking behind the wall, but she decided that she wouldn't be afraid of them. Bran sat wrapped up in his cloak next to the warm hearth, with Mira at his side. Beside him sat Samwell Tarly, reading something to the small blonde-haired boy in his lap, while his wife Gilly was mending some old clothes for the boy. Ser Jorah sat also with them, his expression a little tense. Bran saw glimpses of his travels with the Dragon Queen, and even he, in his youth, understood that the man held a great admiration for the Queen, who was being greeted outside by his sister Sansa. However, Bran had little concern for those small ills, for he feared the greater evil lurking behind the wall. And the worst of it was he felt still too weakened from his illness to return to his visions. Then they were all roused out of their silence as the great wooden doors were opened by the servants, and his brother Jon appeared, smiling back at him. Bran felt deep relief wash over him, for he feared his brother might perish in the south like his father once did. "Jon!" Bran exclaimed, and Jon bridged the distance, hugging him and ruffling his hair. "You have grown quite a bit," another familiar voice said, and it made Bran's heart skip a beat. He found a familiar long face with brown hair and an impish grin smiling back at him. It took him a moment, but then he realized it was his older sister, Arya, all grown up. "Yeah," he said, his voice faltering for a moment. For hours upon hours, he had searched for her, but never found a glimpse of his sister. He was sure that she was dead, but now he knew it was not true. "And you are still short as always," he japed, which made her frown and pat him on the shoulder. However, her smile was bright and amused. Then she proudly touched her little blade. "I have learned some tricks with the sword while I was gone." "I heard you learn some magic tricks yourself," she remarked, which made Bran laugh. It was seldom now that he laughed, for his knowledge rested heavy on his mind these days. "It is true," he admitted, his gaze wandering to the other new faces in the room. Some of them he knew from his visions, while others were unknown to him. There was the Hound with his burned face, who killed the Mountain. Lord Tyrion, the little imp, who was now in service of the Dragon Queen. Lady Jane, the widow of his brother Robb, and at last Daenerys Targaryen herself. He saw her more than once in his visions, but seeing her right here in front of him was different. It felt like looking at a figure from a historical tale. And Daenerys Targaryen was a Targaryen, through and through. She had the fine-shaped features, the silver hair, and the bright purple eyes, marking her as one of the dragons of old. Bran saw a good number of them in his visions. Yet he had to admit Daenerys Targaryen was one of the most beautiful ones. Bran wanted to say some words of welcome and thank her for coming here, but it was Sam who bolted from his seat and spoke first. "It has been quite some time, hasn't it?" Sam addressed Jon with a jolly laugh, hoisting the little boy up into his arms, who blabbered some gibberish. Jon's face lightened up in recognition of his old friend. "Sam, when did you get here?" "Nearly a week ago. Your brother and sister were kind enough to let us stay," Sam replied, and turned to Ser Jorah, who sat in the shadow of the room. Bran doubted Daenerys would recognize him now with his face all gaunt, his beard gone, and his hair long and nearly reaching to his shoulders. "There was another friend I brought with me from Old Town," Sam continued to explain. Jera stood from his seat and stepped forward. The Dragon Queen gasped in surprise. "Sir Jera," she said, her eyes widening at his sudden appearance. "So did you find a cure then?" she added, and stepped closer to take a look at his bandaged arm. He gave a pained smile. "Yes, Coxlisi. Thanks to the help of Sam, I am well to serve you again. If you wish," he replied with a polite bow. At which the queen smiled. Even Jon's face lightened up in understanding, and he smiled, his sword hand wandering to the blade at his hip. "Sir Jorah Mormont, you are the son of Lord Commander Mormont, then?" he asked, offering his hand to the man. Sir Jorah's face paled a little at the mention of his father. "You knew my father then?" Yes. The Lord Commander was indeed my father," he replied politely, shaking Jon's hand in return. "He was a good man, and I respected him. He made me his steward when I came to the Wall, and gave me this sword as a reward for saving his life from a weight." Jon explained, pulling the blade out from its scabbard. Then he held it in front of Sir Jorah, who was struck silent by his words. His dark eyes roamed over the beautiful blade made out of Valyrian steel with the hilt formed into the form of a wolf. "Longclaw," Sir Jorah muttered almost in reverence, touching the blade hesitatingly. His eyes were a little wet as well. Then he grew tense again, biting his dry lips together before looking back at Jon. "How did he die?" he asked, his voice sounding a little hoarse. Jon grew a little sad. "He was killed by traitors in a mutiny. I had them killed for what they did, so do not fret, for he was revenged. However, he told me once this sword was meant for your hands. I feel compelled to return it to you out of gratefulness for the old bear," Jon explained. But Sir Jorah flinched away from the blade as if it was poisoned. "If he gave it to you, it is no longer meant for me. I thank you for avenging my father's death and serving him, though," he returned with an attempt to smile. Jon nodded quietly in understanding and put the blade back where it belonged. "I thank you, Sir Jorah. I am also aware of your problems with my father regarding slavery. But do not worry, I have no intention of sending you away." Jon continued, his gaze flickering to Daenerys. "Your queen told me you have aided her in trying to abolish slavery. I consider your debt paid, and so as long as I am king, you do not need to fear any punishment. Though I have to admit, your niece will probably have my head for it." Bran was a little surprised by Jon's words for the older brother of his childhood. Would have never questioned one of father's decisions. Not that Bran minded. He had not quarreled with the man, and he was surely more valuable as an ally against the White Walkers than just sending him away. Though Jon was right, his niece Lady Mormont might think differently about the matter once she returned here to Winterfell. Sir Jorah himself chuckled at the mention of his niece. "I thank you then," he told Jon. Now, as all the introductions were over, Bran had supper with his family for the first time in nearly 6 years. He felt much lighter now that he was reunited with his family. There was Jon sitting between Arya and Sansa laughing at one of Arya's stories. Next to Sansa sat Rickon, eyeing everything with curiosity and asking Daenerys about her dragons. She seemed a little amused by the fact that the little lord was so interested in them. "Most of them are rather afraid of them," she admitted with laughter. Lord Tyrion, on the other hand, amused the Vale Lords and wildlings with stories of Essos and how the late Lady Arryn put him once on trial. The story made Tormund howl in laughter, while Sansa nearly spluttered out her wine. Of course there were also the other people which were now their allies. There was Samwell Tarly fussing over his wife and little Sam. The Hound drinking himself deep into the cups with some other knights, Rhaenor's friend Gendry, who smiled awkwardly as the old Lord Davos was hovering over him like a grandfather. Even Ser Jorah looked now much more at ease among the lords after Jon assured him his security. Only the Lady Knight Brienne was nowhere to be found. Her squire, Podrick, sat alone among the wildlings listening to their drunken singing. Bran realized then where she probably was. He had seen her in his visions too, fleeing with the King's Lair to King's Landing to fulfill her promise to his lady mother. Of course she would go and visit him after so much time, he mused, turning his attention back to Mira, who was pouring him some fresh ale. She touched his hair affectionately, ruffling it while leaning closer to him. "If you keep thinking so hard, you will get yourself gray hair before you are 29 days old, she remarked in an amused tone. "I just realized it is the first time in 6 years that I have my siblings here all assembled in Winterfell," he admitted in a whisper, leaning closer to her. "You know what I have been thinking about?" she asked, her cheeks pink and flushed from the wine. "What?" he asked. She grinned, giving him a peck on the cheek. "That you are in need of a proper haircut," she remarked. "Sure," he replied, squeezing her hand. "However, I have to speak with Jon first about my last vision." She furrowed her brows in worry, her dark eyes shining in the candles. "Surely this can wait a little," she asked in a hushed whisper. But Bran gave her a serious look in return, and so he did. Once supper was over, he asked Jon to join him in his room. Sam, knowing about what he wished to talk about, asked if he could join too. Jon also asked if the Dragon Queen might join as well. Bran had no objections for it, and added also to the Queen, who brought her dragons to Winterfell to aid them. "What is it you wish to talk about, little brother?" Jon asked, settling himself in the wooden chair next to the window. Outside, a snowstorm was howling and making the window panes rattle. Sam settled himself next to his bed, carrying an oil lamp and putting it down on a small table next to Bran's bed. Mira sat on the bed with him while Daenerys Targaryen preferred to stand leaning against the wall. "I had another vision," he explained. "It was a vision of the Long Night and how the Night's King was killed," he explained, his gaze resting on Jon, who gave him an attentive look. "I saw the last hero defeat the Night's King, piercing him with a red blade of fire," he continued. "However, the most interesting thing about the vision was the fact that the Waits stopped their attacks once their king was killed. So the leader needs to die," Jon remarked. "But where do we find such a blade made of fire?" Daenerys asked then. "I have never heard of such a thing." According to the old legend, the hero forged a blade of fire by killing his wife Nissa. Sam provided, and Daenerys paled a little at his words. "Surely no one needs to die to forge such a blade?" she asked in a shaky voice. Sam looked a little embarrassed, but smiled. "It is a very old story. No one knows what really happened," he explained. Bran nodded, feeling his tiredness coming back to him. "I could try to find the vision, but it would be very hard. The further back a vision is, the harder it is to find it," he admitted, and Jon gave him a worried look while Mira grabbed his hand tightly. "Remember what happened last time. It is too dangerous," she told him, her eyes wandering to Jon in a pleading look. "No, we will handle those White Walkers without you needing to harm yourself, little brother," he returned with a sharp look. Bran felt relieved and guilty at the same time. He wanted nothing more than to help them, but he also had no interest in dying at such a young age. He smiled and decided to tell what else he needed them to know. "There is more. The first Night's King is not the current one. As I said, the first one was killed by the last hero, while the current one was once a man of the Night's Watch. As far as I can tell," he explained, at which Jon's face darkened. "I can see there is more you want to say," Jon urged Bran to continue. "You surely remember the story old Nan used to tell us about the Lord Commander, who was seduced by the corpse bride and who reigned in the Night Fort. I saw him defeated and mourning his wife. However, he did not die," he continued his explanation. And Jon's face shone with understanding, as if he had a piece of information that even Bran had no idea about. "Craster's sons," Jon said, then his gaze darting to Sam. "You remember Craster's sons being sacrificed. The Lord Commander from the story did the same thing. He was said to commit horrid human sacrifices, which was the reason why German and Brandon the Breaker rose up against him to end his reign. Maybe this is also his work, though I wonder what those White Walkers do with those newborn boys." "He turns them into White Walkers," Bran explained, answering Jon's question. "I saw it in my visions. Well, I don't care why this Night's King wants those children, but we will have to stop this barbaric practice," Daenerys added with determination. Bran felt relieved by her clear words. Maybe with the 2 dragons and the army, it will be enough. After all, Jon brought a lot of dragon glass, and they had several Valyrian blades at their disposal. All he knew was that he needed to get better to be of use again. Jaime knew he should feel grateful. He had no longer to endure the cold weather outside. Even if he was locked up here with guards before his doors, he was at least warm and no longer freezing off his balls like on their never-ending ride to the north. He could have laughed. Actually, he was supposed to join the Night's Watch, but the terrible storm made travel impossible at the moment, so the honorable king had to keep him as a guest until said storm would disperse. Not that he cared what would happen to him. His sister was dead, his children were dead. He would never see his home again, and felt a deep sense of failure, which darkened his mood even further. "I should have asked the Dragon Queen to kill me," he thought angrily, drinking the bitter ale which made him miss the fresh summer wine he would often drink in Bronn's company. His old friend would have laughed at him if he could see him now. "I even failed you," he thought. "I could never fulfill my promise in giving you a lordship and a good wife." "Well, not your first failure. You could not even stop your own sister." "So much for the great knight I once wanted to be," He emptied the last of the ale and threw the empty cup against the wall. He let himself sink back into the chair before looking down at his black garb. He wanted to laugh again at the absurdity of the situation, but then the door opened and he was struck silent by the sudden appearance of the person standing there. Brienne of Tarth was hardly changed. Her time in the north did not turn her into a beauty, but this was never necessary for this woman to make a striking pose. No, she still had the same strong build. Only her face looked harder and her pale blue eyes shone with anger at him, while her thick lips shuddered with emotions. Jaime still found himself smiling at the first friendly face he found after coming north. "It has been quite some time," he remarked, not attempting to stand up. Brienne seemed unbothered by his unpoliteness. "You are a fool, you know, a bloody fool," she muttered angrily. "If you just got over yourself and helped me in River Run and abandoned your mad sister, things could have been much different. I am sure Lady Sansa would have spoke for you. Now look at you all in black. What will you do at the wall? Become like your dwarven brother and drink yourself into an early grave," she continued, wrinkling her nose at the smell of alcohol coming from him. Jaime felt anger rise up inside him at her hurtful words. Deep inside he knew she was right. Then his head ached with pain, and for a brief moment he felt the need to vomit his breakfast out. "I'm sure you remember the story I told you about the Mad King and how he demanded my father's head. Knowing this, did you really think I would abandon my family so easily?" he asked her in a pained tone. "I am a Lannister. Tell me, would you abandon your family?" he asked, accusingly. Brienne laughed at this, her face turning into an angry scowl. "Didn't you know I abandoned my old ailing father to become a knight for Randilly? Then I met Lady Stark and made an oath to bring her daughters to safety. Please don't lecture me on my duties to my family, for I at least know what is right and wrong. You always knew what your sister was, and you still did not abandon her when you still had some of your honor left," she returned, and every word hurt more than the last. Jaime bolted up from his chair, and for a moment he did not know what he wanted to say. As the anger at himself was consuming him, he did no longer know who he was or what he wanted from the future. He also wondered if she was right. Would I have been happier if I helped her in River Run? Would I have been able to abandon Tommen and Cersei? Maybe. Or maybe not. His breath was coming fast now, and he clenched his fists in anger as Brienne kept giving him this unyielding look. He wished for her to say something comforting to him and to make him forget the pain, but he also knew she could not do him this favor. He looked up, his eyes burning. "Tell me, if your precious Rensley was mad, would you have abandoned him? Or wouldn't you have stayed at his side as long as he promised his love and devotion?" Jaime said, and regretted it the moment he saw this hurt expression crossing her face. Yet, he knew he also won a small victory. "Was my love for Cersei less than the one you shared for Rensley, only because she was mad? I knew her all my life, and she was the first woman I loved. Do you think it is so easy to leave someone like that, or my son, who was still alive at the time we met in River Run?" he continued, and Brienne's face softened a little at his words, despite the hurt still visible in her face. At her lack of response, he thought of this as his cue to continue. "I see. At least you are honest about it. It is true, then, that you killed Stannis Baratheon to avenge your Rensley," he added to make his feelings clear to her. He wanted to make her understand how pressured he felt back then. Her eyes widened at his words. If she wasn't such a controlled lady, he was sure she would have slapped him right there. Not that he would have cared. "I killed Stannis because he murdered Rensley with shadow magic. I was there and saw him die. He was my king," she explained in a shaky voice, and for a brief moment he thought she would cry. Still a laugh escaped him. "Ruzio was a fool and no rightful king. I never once liked Stannis, but he was still the older brother. What I really want to say is this. Are you really so much better than me? You aided Renly, who was no rightful king, and I aided my sister, who was no rightful queen." Yet she did not look impressed by his words. "Well, at least Rensley never blew up except with wildfire," she snapped back, and he would have applauded her if his hand was not gone. "I was not there when it happened, but you can be sure that I would have tried to stop her even if my life depended on it. No, it was already over once I returned. Everything was lost before I could even do anything about it. And then Cersei was in power. I tried to stop her, you know. When the Dragon Queen came to take King's Landing, I knew she wanted to burn the city with wildfire. I tried to stop her and her monster, but in the end, I failed, even at that. It was the Hound and the younger Stark girl who killed them both, and I had to watch." He rambled on, his emotions overwhelming him. Tears were dripping down his cheeks now, and he averted his gaze. He felt like a little boy for crying like this. He did not see her features softening and only felt her comforting arms around him. It felt like a heavy weight was taken from his shoulders as he cried. It was icy cold outside, and the sky was bleak and dark. There was no hint of sunshine, and sometimes even the stars were distant and seemed more like fading candles. Inside of Winterfell it was warm enough because of the hot springs, but Sansa feared for the other lords in their castles. Even with Jon back, she felt more restless every day. She pulled her cloak tighter and made her way back inside. She made sure all the guests were lodged properly before making her way back to Jon, who spent now most of his time plotting with Bran in his rooms. Samwell Tarly was often with them, and even the Dragon Queen would sometimes sit and listen what her little brother had to say about the White Walkers. I wonder when Jon will go the wall, she wondered, but realized then it would take some time before the lords would be able to assemble in Winterfell. The streets were hard to pass these days, and the harsh storm in the last days would keep them to their castles. Today she found Bran sitting with Jon alone, whispering to each other in the half-darkness of the room. Only a small candle provided some light and gave Bran an almost halo-like face. In general, he reminded her little of the boy she knew running about in Winterfell. Bran seemed older than his age. It scared her a little, and she sometimes wished her little brother would come back to her and give her one of his impish grins before climbing on a tree. "Oh, did I bother you two?" she asked as she poked her head inside the room. Jon and Bran looked up in surprise, but none of them seemed startled by her appearance. "Good morning. I brought you some food," she said, and placed the bowl with broth and bread on a small table next to Bran. She put her hand on his head and was satisfied, for his fever was now almost gone. Miraj, she knew, would be relieved too. She was the one taking care of Brandy in the first days after Jon's arrival. But now, as all her guests were lodged, it was easier to get back in helping her take care of Bran. "Oh, thank you. I am hungry," he said with a small smile, and Sansa felt deeply relieved by his answer. For days he hardly ate anything, but now with Jon's arrival he seemed to get better every day. "Then eat," Jon said, and turned to Sansa. He looked a little uncomfortable, and was generally very guarded around her since he returned. It felt like there was some invisible wall between them, similar when they were children. Sansa did not realize it at first, but now she thought it might have to do with the fact that Arya was back. They were always very close, and of course he would spend more time with her younger sister. It made her sad, but she did not wish to show it, for it made her happy that Jon returned safely. When he went south, she feared he might end up dead like their father. After all, the Targaryens were never really fond of the Starks before and after Robert's rebellion. However, she was surprised to find the Dragon Queen being more than friendly to her brother. They would often spend their time walking outside in the Godswood, speaking about what only the gods could know. When she asked Lord Tyrion about it, he admitted it surprised him himself. For their first meeting was quite rocky, and even later, Jon was always quite guarded around her. However, shortly after the defeat of Cersei, something changed between them, or so was his theory. Sansa had her own theory, but she would of course keep it to herself. It was quite simple, actually. Her brother liked the queen like boys like girls. There was nothing magically about it, nor did it appear strange to her. Her brother was a king, after all, and a very affectionate person, even if a bit broody at times. He was probably the first man who did not seek after her crown or trying to gain power through her. I know how this feels, for all of them only wanted me to gain Winterfell. Even Lord Ordine would have slighted her if she was just a common bastard, she realized then, but she decided not to care. The fact that he showed her appreciation and was no monster helped a lot. Her time in the South made her learn her lesson. There are no princes from fairy tales, only men with weaknesses and strengths. Better the Vale Lord than Jaff or Ramsay, she thought. "Sansa, I wondered if you might have some time to talk," Jon remarked as they left Bran's room. Jon looked tense, and it scared her a little, but she smiled nonetheless. "Of course, let us take a walk outside," she offered, and Jon nodded. Outside, fresh snowflakes melted in their hair as they walked slowly and steadily. After a moment of silence, Jon stopped. "I should have told you this for a long time, but I feared with Lord being here it would be too dangerous to our cause. I hope you might forgive me," he tried to explain. It stopped for a moment. Sansa realized soon what he was talking about. It was about Bran's vision. Her heart was suddenly beating a little faster. What could be so terrible that he gives me this guilty look, she wondered. She patted his shoulder. "Just tell me already, Jon," she urged him on. "It is about Bran's vision. He showed me my mother," he finally said, and now Sansa realized why he was so guarded. I always talked bad about his mother. He probably feared I would do so again if I heard about it, and Lord Bates could have used it to break us apart. She smiled broadly, hoping she could encourage him to open up. She did wish for nothing more than to mend their relationship, and she would even endure to hear about the woman who her father shamed her mother with. "It is all right. Tell me," she told him, and he seemed only more anxious. "You know her, my mother. Her statue is in the crypt to be found," he explained, and it took Sansa a moment to realize what he meant. Then it dawned on her, as clear as a morning sky. Gods, it made all sense. Why father always refused to talk about her, and why he let Jon grow up here, in Winterfell. No normal bastard would grow up with his true-born children. She looked at him with wide eyes, searching his face, as if she hoped to find a Targaryen hidden there. Yet there was only Jon, the same long face framed by dark hair. Only his eyes might be more than a simple dark gray. No, now she remembered how they sometimes appeared nearly black or indigo, like some of the Targaryen kings. It meant her father never shamed her mother. It meant he was not her brother, but a cousin. It also meant he was not Eddard Stark's son, and she realized now why he did not tell her. He feared Lord Baelish might find out and use it against him. It pained her that he did not entrust her with his secret sooner, but she was pragmatic enough to understand his reasons. Gods! It makes him her nephew. Then another thought came to her, and she looked up at Jon, grasping his shoulder tighter. "Does the Queen know about this?" she dared to ask. Jon looked a bit startled by her question, but nodded his head in affirmation. "Yes, I was forced to tell her," he explained, and now Sansa understood. Lord Tyrion also knew then. She remembered his knowing smile, and now she felt like a fool. "I am truly sorry for delaying this so long, but there seemed never the right moment for any of this," he explained, with guilty look after another brief moment of silence between them. "How did she force you?" she asked. Instead, "I rode one of her dragons. I had no other choice," he explained. Still looking guilty, "I know that I am not Eddard Stark's son, but do not worry, I will give up my crown to Rickon once he is of age, or Bran if he changes his mind. Of course we have to survive first," he said, and she knew he wanted to continue his explanations to her, but she raised her hand to silence him for a moment. "I don't doubt your words, and forgive you. I understand why you didn't tell me," she replied, even if it was hard for her to admit it. His face lightened up, and it gave her some comfort. "I thank you, Sansa," he said, and gave her a hug. "No, I am thankful you told me. It helps me to understand things better," she replied, and shuddered from the cold wind. "Maybe we should get back inside," he offered, and she nodded in agreement. Jon felt relieved as he found most of his lords reaching Winterfell whole and in good health. Nearly half a moon ago, he returned to Winterfell, and winter grew only harsher every day. For days, storms would howl around the castle walls and make the passage to Winterfell impossible. A few days ago, the storms finally died down a little, and the first lords appeared. Many of them came with their wives, children, and even the small folk serving them. They did so on Jon's wish, and he was sure many of them viewed it as overdone. Many of them still doubted him, he knew. However, Jon knew how dangerous the White Walkers were. Should they fail, the women, children, and small folk would end up as weight material to strengthen the army of the dead. His plan to counter this was simple. He would keep them here safe in Winterfell while he and his men would march to the wall. As a guest, Daenerys sat at the high table with Jon, his siblings, and a good number of other lords. There were Lord Manderly, Lord Umber, Lady Cerwyn, young Lady Mormont, Lady Karstark with Tormund, Lord Royce, Lord Harding, Gendry, Lord Tyrion, Sir Davos, and the Vale Lords. The few wilding leaders left were also present, keeping their distance from the other Kneeler Lords. He introduced Daenerys to all of them. Some looked more pleased than others, but Jon knew they would keep their disapproval to themselves until she returned south with her dragons. Jon waited patiently until there was silence in the hall. He rose from his seat and felt suddenly a little anxious. It was always like this. Doubts were creeping into his mind, making him ask himself if this was the right path. Then he would think back on the soothing words of Master Aemon to remind himself of his duty. "Do what needs to be done, my boy. Kill the boy and let the man be born." It was not the first time that Jon thought of the old man. For years he knew him, and he was more than aware of his sadness for the loss of his family. How wonderful would it be if he could have met Daenerys, he thought sadly. Would he be happy if he knew who I am? Yet Jon knew it was no use to ponder over such things. The old man was gone and no longer able to give him advice. So he brushed away those memories and let his eyes wander over the assembled lords. It filled him with a little bit of satisfaction that he could at least accomplish this. Even if he failed now, he could at least say he did everything in his power. He only hoped it was enough. We defended the wall against hundred thousands of wildlings. He tried to reassure himself, but doubt was gnawing at his mind still. Welcome back to Winterfell, my lords and ladies. I am pleased all of you arrived here well and in good health. I am sure if Lord Stark and King Robb were alive, they would be very pleased. Then he raised his goblet and drowned it to calm his nerves a little. As you might all be aware, I called you here to introduce you to our guest, Queen Daenerys Targaryen, who won her crown from the Lannister Queen only a few moons ago. Not only this, but her grace granted us independence in return for helping her to win the allegiance of both the Riverlands and Vale without any bloodshed, he explained, his eyes flickering for a brief moment to Daenerys. And Jon felt sometimes a little jealous. She seemed to thrive on the attention of others while he preferred to keep to himself in the shadows. After those words, he paused to measure the reactions of the lords. Most of them looked content, and even some cheers could be heard. Jon knew many of them were skeptical when he proposed the idea of an allegiance with Daenerys. Especially young Lady Mormont was quite suspicious of Daenerys, but looked now rather pleased. Still, there is another matter which needs to be addressed. It is the threat coming from beyond the wall. The Night's Watch is in dire need, and I intend to take to march to the wall within a fortnight. For this I intend to call the banners and ask any man capable of fighting to follow me to do away with this danger once and for all. Once this is done, I promise I will keep the peace, and no man will have to be called to war anytime soon. He continued his speech. It was a mix of expected disbelief and fear in their faces. It dawned on them now why Jon asked them to bring their wives, children, and servants. Jon also knew that many of them did not like it at all. He could see it in their grim and disapproving faces. They wanted to stay home and sit out the winter. They were tired of fighting, and he felt guilty for asking them to take up their weapons again. And he also knew exactly how he would draw them out. His gaze wandered back to Daenerys, and he gave her a small smile. Even Queen Daenerys promised her men and dragons to fight with us, he told them, and many of them looked rather surprised by his words. Jon knew most of them would now feel more compelled to pledge their support for his cause. The men of the North would never wish to be known as cowards and allow sovereign men defend their land while they kept to safety at home. It would go against their honor. The first one to rise was Lord Umber, who flashed Jon a determined look. Please speak, Lord Umber, Jon offered, and the mighty lord made use of it without wasting any time to get to the matter at hand. I understand now why you wished us to bring our wives, children, and asked us to tell the small folk to come here. You intend to keep them safe here in Winterfell while we go to war, he said in his usual booming voice. Jon nodded in affirmation. Yes, I fear what would happen if we are defeated. The innocent would be an easy target for the White Walkers, who are known to turn the dead into their servants, and it would only increase their ever-growing army. Lord Umber turned back to his own people. Have you heard we will go to war again? He boomed, and many of his men broke out in cheers. Only this time, we have the honor to defend the wall itself, he added with a bout of laughter. It seemed the Lord had his men prepared for a war before coming here. Yet some of the other lords looked less approving. Especially Lord Manderly and Lady Cerwyn looked rather guarded. With Lady Cerwyn, Jon understood why. The Battle of the Bastards cost her many men. In regards to Lord Manderly, Jon already knew how he would convince the Lord. I read doubt in your eyes, Lord Manderly, Jon asked, and the Lord looked a little flustered for a moment before smiling and showing his teeth. Do not fret, Lord Manderly. Well, I need a portion of your men. There is also another important task I wish to entrust you with, Jon explained, granting a smile. Jon knew the Lord before him was a prideful man who would enjoy such a special task. Lord Manderly's face lightened up at Jon's words. What task would this be? The Lord asked, with curiosity. I ask you to stay behind in White Harbor, and prepare all ships you can muster. Should we fail, I ask you to take our people to safety, while the White Walkers are mighty. They are not able to swim as far as I know. You understand the importance of such a task. My lord, Jon explained his task, and the man's eyes widened, shining with appreciation. Not only did Jon allow him to keep away from battle, but he also entrusted him with the safety of the whole North. It was not only a sign of appreciation, but also an honor, which seemed to flatter the man. I will of course fulfill your wish, your grace, Lord Manderly returned. Jon felt satisfied with his answer and made a note to himself to thank Sansa for her suggestion to give Lord Manderley this task. Now the room was alive with whispering and discord. Jon steeled himself and asked the question he wanted to ask the whole time. "So, are you with me then? Will you follow me?" he asked, and his gaze darting to each lord before coming to a rest on the Vale lords. "I know I have asked enough of the Vale, but this threat does not only concern our kingdom, but also the Vale and the entire South. I hope you are with me as well," he added. "It was young Lady Mormont who stood first. The men of Bear Island stand with you." Lord Manderley soon followed, although he did do it with less enthusiasm. Then Tormund stood with his wife Lady Karstark at his side, who was cradling her son in her arms. "House Karstark stands with you," she said with a small smile, her eyes flickering to the wildling leaders sitting behind her. "Now we will drive those White Walkers back. Where they came from?" Tormund exclaimed with determination, which made all the other wildlings laugh and raise their cups. "It seems my husband's kin is with you as well," Lady Karstark added, and Tormund laughed. As the larger houses had pledged their support, Jon knew the smaller ones had little choice but to follow. None of them wanted their honor questioned, especially not when the wildlings appeared so enthusiastic to fend for the north. At last he dared to turn his attention back to the Vale lords. Lord Hardying, blonde-haired and tall, carried a blank look, while Lord Royce granted Jon a fatherly smile. Lord Royce promised Jon he would convince the other lords to his cause, so the older spoke. "As Lord Robin Arryn's representative in this assembly, I am prepared to pledge my men to your cause. For there is one gift the North gave us that counts more than any gold. The North gave us the murderer of our beloved Lord Arryn, and also his lady wife. Without Lady Sansa's help, would still be ruled by Lord Baelish. I thank you with all my heart," he thanked older knight. Together they drank again, and Jon felt he was now on the right track. He could not keep himself from feeling a little relieved, despite the horror awaiting behind the wall. Later that night, when everyone was settled for the night and silence reigned in the great hall, his smile was gone as the last candles flickered. For like the darkness overtaking the hall, his doubts returned. He thought of Bran's words, "The Night's King needs to die." It was such a simple thing to say, but Jon had his doubts. His servants could be handled with dragon glass and Valyrian steel, but the Night's King himself was surely stronger. There was a reason why he survived this long. "Your speech was quite the success, I have to say," a familiar voice remarked warmly, making his heart skip a beat. He turned around and found Daenerys smiling at him from the other side of the room. She was dressed in a warm wool dress, and her hair was kept in a simple, long braid falling over her shoulder. She played with it as she walked towards him, settling herself on the bench next to him. He found himself returning her smile. "I am not a great speaker. My brother Robb had this gift. He had a way words, and the ladies loved him for it," he added with a chuckle, thinking of Robb and how the ladies would fawn over his brother's red locks. Even the Theon Greyjoy was jealous of Robb most of the time. It was one of the few things Jon and Theon had in common. "Still, your lords respect you. Even I, as a foreigner in this land, can see this," she added, and moved closer. If they weren't alone, Jon would have flinched away, but they were alone with only the shadows dancing against the walls as their companions. Still, Jon felt unsure about his feelings in regards to Daenerys. It was true. He enjoyed her company more than he liked to admit, but still there was always this fear in his mind regarding his resurrection. Since he came back from death, he was not sure who or what he was. It sometimes felt as if he lost a piece of himself in the darkness of death. "What if I am like them? What if I am a dead man walking?" "Is something wrong?" Daenerys asked him with raised eyebrows. "Did I say something wrong?" she added, and leaned closer, her purple eyes fixed at him. He raised his hands. "No, I was just thinking," he tried to explain, but Daenerys chuckled in amusement. "You were not thinking. You were brooding like always," she corrected him, and he felt her warm breath on his face. He realized then, to his embarrassment, that he was all too quiet and staring at her. He felt suddenly very self-conscious, but he was unable to look away as their eyes met. He swallowed slowly, his eyes flickering to her pursed lips. They were all full and rosy. He wondered if they tasted like the fruitcake Sansa served for their guests this evening. He tried to brush away those thoughts, but failed. His hands were wet, his heart was beating fast like a drum, and his mouth was dry. He truly felt like a little boy. "You know nothing, Jon Snow." Ygrutter would always taunt him for his insecurity. "Kneelers think too much. We wildlings take what we need," he remembered her words. Back then he was a man of the Night's Watch, and now he was free of his oath. He realized again, even if it was still hard for him to grasp sometimes, Daenerys probably felt his insecurity, so she moved closer, her hand touching his neck. Jon was a little startled by her touch. He knew his pulse was pounding fast, and it seemed to amuse Daenerys greatly. "You know, I find your reluctance quite thrilling," she remarked, and Jon felt his face flush. She sat up, kneeling on the bench so they were at the same height. Then she tilted her head and her slender hand wandered down his shoulder. Instinctively, Jon grasped her hand, enclosing it in his. Then he yanked her closer, and she nearly fell right into his lap. He wanted to apologize, but it was her who drew him closer with her dark purple eyes, which seemed to shine like gemstones in the fading candlelight. He slowly inclined his face towards hers, and she granted him an impish grin before she lay her mouth on his. Her lips tasted like a freshly split fruit. For a long moment, Daenerys kissed him, and it startled him a little. How capable she was in this, she ruled him. Put him off, lured him back each time different. When he broke away from her, he was breathing deeply as he stared back at her. Her cheeks were beautifully flushed, and her braid got a bit untidy from the grasp of his hands. There was a moment of silence, and then she laughed. It was no mocking laughter. It was the laughter of a girl who was deeply amused and happy. "Forgive me, Jon, but you do look like a star-struck maid," she japed, but said it in a soft, almost soothing tone. He felt not insulted by her words. It just felt so different from Ygritte, he realized. Ygritte was insistent and fast when it came to such things. Daenerys was slow and methodical, as if it was something she had studied. Then he realized his stupidity. She was married to a horse lord, and then to a slave lord from Meereen. Of course she would have such knowledge. "There is nothing to forgive," he finally said. "I was just surprised how well you can use your tongue," he remarked in attempt of a joke. He still felt a little flustered and unsure, but wished not to show his doubts to her. She was full of mirth at his words. "I had a friend named Doria. She was a very good teacher," she explained. Jon wanted to add something, but suddenly the door cracked open and two of his guards bolted into the room. They were all covered in snow, their faces a bit too pale. Jon flinched away from Daenerys, realizing what impression he gave those two men. "Your Grace, there are men here. They wish to speak with you. They traveled all from the wall," the guardsman explained. Jon was frozen in shock for a moment, but the squeeze of Daenerys' hand on his shoulder brought him back to reality. "Get them inside," he ordered them. Bratzel was no longer himself. He stared ahead to the wall which protected the human folk for thousands of years. Now it was time to tear it down once and for all. The humans soiled this world long enough, and it was time to purge away their taint with ice. Then the world would finally be able to clean itself. He found himself smiling when the creature finally appeared. The white dragon was born in the south and died in the sea several moons ago. Now the dragon would be the servant of winter. The ice dragon. The dragon gave a screeching sound and flapped its wide wings as he drew closer. "Be welcome," he found himself greeting the dragon, who was still suffering from the slow, painful death it experienced. As the dragon finally landed on the icy plains, he found its eyes of molten gold empty and dead. He slowly crawled from his dead horse and carefully touched the dragon's head. A bolt stuck from its neck and dried blood tinged its skin. He grasped for the bolt and pulled it out. The dragon did not move, nor did it protest. "You are a marvelous creature and far too good for the humans," he whispered to the dragon. He felt pain still lingering in the dragon's mind. "Your mother abandoned you and sent you to your death, but I will take away your suffering. I will give you a purpose," he continued. The dragon bowed, its head down, and he let his cool hand grace the dragon's skin. He knew then he gained its trust. It was like a little child lingering in the darkness, desperately searching for the light. He took a last look at those golden eyes, which then turned into a bright blue color of frost. The dragon was now his servant. Slowly he crawled on top of the winged creature. The dragon flapped its wings, throwing Snow up into the air, and propelled him into the sky. Now the world was a landscape of snow and trees. Above him, thousands of stars flickered around, a pale, thin moon. It was long ago that he saw such a moon. Once he was a human like them, tainted and monstrous. He knew them well, for he watched them for countless centuries. In every time and in every place, their deeds remained the same. Humans were like little children burning themselves with fire as they quarreled over power and crowns. It was in their nature to destroy what they did not understand, and so they killed the trees and the children. Desperate, the children created his predecessors to fend off the humans. In the end, the children grew afraid of their own creation and bonded with the humans to defeat them. His bride was one of the few who survived their butchery, but in the end they came for her with dragon glass and fire. He was the last one to survive. It was the reason why he made a pact with one of the humans who offered him his sons to create others like him. But still their kind were few. Yet, he did not care. He would fulfill what he set out to do. Maybe then he would finally find peace. It was not long until the wall of ice, once built by the Wolf King, appeared. His dragon let his flame of blue fire feast upon the icy wall. Dragon fire was magic, and he could feel the spells weaken as the flames danced beautifully in front of his eyes. He also saw the feeble humans clad in black who swore to protect the wall. He felt no pity in his cold heart. Their world might have been forged in fire, but it would end in ice. Bran was woken from his dark dreams, drenched in sweat. He tried to remember, but everything seemed hazy and distant. Still, he knew something was very wrong. When Jon stood in his room in the middle of the night, his face white as a sheet, Bran pulled himself up and brushed his hair out of his face. "Tell me what happened," he demanded to know, from his brother, who stood there, all too silent. "Jon," he snapped again, but his brother gave no answer. Instead, Jon bridged the distance between them before lifting Bran out of his bed. "The wall was attacked. Some of my former brothers of the Night's Watch and the Vale Lords I placed there returned," Jon explained tensely. As Jon carried Bran into the great hall, he found half the castle awake. Most of the Northern Lords were assembled, and so were the Vale Lords. Meera winked at him, while Sansa sat next to Rickon, observing everything in silence. Arya stood next to her, looking rather grim, but determined. Gendry only looked unsure, trying to appear brave. All the while, Bran tried to understand how this happened. When he first came south with Meera, he was afraid the wall would fall if he crossed over. After all, the Night's King was able to enter the Three-Eyed Raven. However, when the wall stood unharmed, he thought it was mere imagination on his part. Then he looked up and saw them. The group of men who sat settled before the warm hearths looked horrible. Most of them carried shell-shocked expressions, their faces gray as if all the blood left them. Some also suffered from terrible frostbite of different grades. Their ears, noses, and fingers were blistered and at the worst black and hard. Around them were servant girls trying to take care of the men's wounds. Jon addressed one of the men who looked the most collected. He was a man of maybe 30, and from his black garb, Bran deduced he was a man of the Night's Watch. From the way the man looked at Jon, he realized he was familiar with his brother. "Duncan, would you be so kind to tell us what happened?" Jon asked, his eyes darting to the other lords who sat in silence awaiting Jon's instructions. Among them was also Lord Harding, who looked like someone kicked him in his balls. Jon settled Bran down into one of the chairs. Outside, the wind howled in its never-ending tune. "The storm is back," he realized and shuddered. "They will be coming for us all." "Will you finally tell us what is going on?" Lord Harding demanded angrily, hammering his fist down on the wooden table before him. Jon was unmoved by the man's reaction. "I know you are angry, my lord. I know how it feels to lose friends," he returned in a calm voice. Yet, Bran could see how tense Jon was. "I lost several hundred of my men I trained and who were loyal to me, to whatever the gods know," Lord Harding muttered angrily, his pain over the loss of his men clearly painted in his face. "They are called White Walkers, my lord," Sansa reminded him, softly, which seemed to snap the lord out his angry state of mind. "And we will have to fight them soon. Do not fret, there will be enough possibilities for revenge," she added, and granted him a weak smile. Lord Harding nodded in understanding. "Of course, Lady Sansa, I lost my composure," he mumbled, and gave Jon an apologizing look. "There is no need for you to apologize," Jon said, and turned back to Duncan, who had been silently watching the discussions and whispering around him. Jan patted his shoulder. "Please tell us what you know," he told the man, who swallowed hard before speaking. "It started a few days ago. A white-winged monster appeared on the horizon, a dragon with cream-colored scales. It spied blue fire, and then we saw them. It is all true. They look like old men with eyes made of blue frost. Ed knew immediately what to do. He called all men together to defend the wall and sent some of us to Winterfell to inform you what happened. I don't know, but I doubt they will hold out long against those creatures. If they are not already gone," he recounted slowly, and his hands shivering in fear. Bran felt utterly shocked, and 1,000 questions reeled through his mind. A dragon? Like in my dream? Bran's gaze darted immediately to the Dragon Queen, who sat in silence, her eyes wide and her mouth a thin line. Her knuckles were all white as she was grasping the wooden table hard. "This can't be," she protested. "I thought Viserion died, and why would he serve this creature?" she muttered fearfully. her eyes searching for Jon's. The Night's King can resurrect death things and command them. If he can do it with humans, why not with dragons, Jon explained. And the Dragon Queen grew only more distressed by his words. But Viserion died in the south, she insisted with hope shining in her eyes. Maybe the creature conjured an ice dragon with magic. Bran understood her need for hope, but he knew what he saw. The long night reached the south by now. We have not seen the sun for days now, he explained, guessing at what was happening. The Dragon Queen looked a little lost, her eyes displaying a number of different emotions. There was fear mixed with anger and also desperation. It reminded him a little of his lady mother. Rhaenyra once came down with a terrible fever and was between life and death for nearly 2 weeks. The Dragon Queen carries the same expression now. So what will we do now? C.A. Davos asked, bringing him back to the topic at hand. Their plan of marching to Ye Wall was obsolete now. If the wall was gone, they had maybe a few days left to prepare. Jon pondered his answer for a moment before suddenly turning to Lord Manderly. If you sent a raven to White Harbor, how long would it take to prepare the ships? Jon asked nervously. No raven would make it to White Harbor fast enough, Sam reminded him a little reluctantly. Jon was struck silent again, looking all tense and serious like their father when he was pondering over a difficult problem. Then he addressed Lord Hardying. I have to ask a favor of you, Lord Hardying. His expression hard and determined. Lord Hardying was a little startled, but nodded in affirmation. What favor? Jon's eyes flickering to Arya, Sansa, and at last to Bran. I ask you to take my siblings south. I also ask you take the wives, children, and the small folk of my lords to safety. Jon explained, if the wall is taken, Winterfell is no longer safe, and we have to prepare for battle. Lord Ember looked determined enough. Lord Manderly, utterly frightened. Lady Sarwyn was silent as a ghost. Lady Mormont glared with determination. Lord Glover was serious like always. All the while Tormund drowned his fear with wine from his bearskin, while his wife Lady Karstark slapped him on the arm and gave him a disapproving look for his behavior. Tormund only grinned and offered her some in return, and the lady tasted it, surprisingly. Will you do as I ask of you? Jon asked Lord Harding again, in a more commanding tone. I would have preferred to fight, but I see what an important task it is, and so I will do as you ask, Lord Harding replied. Some of the tension left Jon then. I thank you. I won't go, Arya exclaimed. Then her face a grimace of anger. Sansa and Rickon may go, but I won't, she insisted, grabbing Jon's shoulder in a pleading way. Arya, Sansa called out and tried to console her. Arya ignored her and continued pleading with Jon, who lost his composure when she didn't stop. You will go, shouted at her, his gaze unyielding. It made Bran shudder and feel a little scared of Jon. He had never seen Jon getting angry like this, especially not at Arya. There are no buts and ifs. You will go south, he told her, and Arya was struck speechless. Then she angrily bolted out of the room with Gendry attempting to follow her until Jon looked at him directly. You will go with her, Lord Baratheon. Make sure she goes south, and if you wish, Ser Davos may accompany you. You will be the Lord of the Stormlands, and a lord is in need of a good advisor like him. Ser Davos looked a little startled by Jon's words, but he gave a thankful nod in return. Jon ruffled through his hair in a frustrated manner and looked over to Daenerys. I hoped it might be easier, he muttered more to himself than to the people in the room. The Dragon Queen herself looked more composed now and stood from her seat. I will call for my dragons, she assured them before looking over to Tyrion, who had been strangely silent all the time. The little lord gulped down his wine and smiled weakly in return. I will not go either, Bran said then. I want to stay here in Winterfell and observe everything from my tree, he explained, while Mira gave him one of her disapproving looks. Then I will stay too, she added with determination. Jon breathed deeply, his eyes burning dangerously. Nonsense, you will go with the others, he said, and Bran knew Jon would not change his mind regarding this matter. And how will we fight them? Tormund asked. Jon sighed, patting Bran's shoulder. I am sorry for asking this of you. Would you be able to help us with finding out through your abilities how far they are? Bran smiled weakly and felt suddenly a lot more useful. Gladly, Bran replied. And so he did it, and found himself slightly relieved when he found out that the White Walkers had hardly left. He walled it meant they had at least several days before they would be here. So what will we do now? Bran asked Jon. Strangely, it was the Dragon Queen who made a suggestion. There are woods there between the wall and Winterfell, Daenerys asked her finger, pointing at the wooden area on the map. Jon looked at her with curiosity. What do you have in mind? The Dragon Queen pursed her lips. I intend to burn them with my dragons. The rest will be left for you to take care of, she explained, and Bran knew exactly what she meant. That is no bad idea, Jon replied, and earned himself a thankful smile by the Dragon Queen. We will also need all the Valyrian sword we have, and I hope the dragonglass spears we started to make will be enough, Jon continued. You certainly have my sword, Lady Brienne said, resting her hand on the fine blade at her hip. Oathbreaker forged from his father's sword, Ice. Also, Serene brought with him Widow's Wail, like my sword. It was forged from your father's sword. I say this makes 4 Valyrian swords, with the one from Lord Targaryen. Jon smiled at her words. This is good to know, Lady Brienne. Brienne did not smile, for he saw a dragon with winter on his wings, and fire blue like frost. Daenerys was filled with a terror she could not quite describe. She could not forget the empty faces of the men who fled from the wall. Some of them lost fingers, noses, or entire limbs to the freezing cold, but all of them told the same story. A white dragon attacking them and the army of death with him. So it is all true. Before this, the wall protected them from this enemy, but now it was gone. The dragon has 3 heads. This was the prophecy her brother believed in, and now there were only 2 dragons. What if it is not enough? It made her shiver despite the warmth. You look afraid, Jon remarked, snapping her out of her stupor. Her and Jon sat late into the night speaking about the coming battle. It comforted her and soothed her shock a little, for her poor child was now in the hands of death. Yes, she admitted. I fear fighting my own child, she added, and felt sadness overcome her. Losing Viziering was one thing, but fighting against her child was even worse. Jon moved closer and wrapped his arm around her shoulder. I cannot promise victory, but I am thankful for your help. Year upon year, since saving Lord Commander Mormont from a weight attack, did I try to convince the people to believe me, but hardly anyone ever did. You did it despite your doubts. For this you will always have my deep respect, he explained, and there was warmth to his voice which made her long to be closer to him. She did not know when it started or why it even happened. Her former lovers were vastly different from Jon Snow. Khal Drogo was a hardened warrior, and Daario, a man who had many women in the past. Jon was almost innocent compared to those men, or this was at least her impression of him. She wondered now if this was what she had been searching for. I wanted the Red Door, a place where I could be safe and at peace. Jon was such a person. He was a good man in a world full of monsters and fools. It was seldom to find someone like that, she knew, especially people in power were seldom like this. Most of them were pompous and entitled, thinking they were born with the right to rule. Viserys was like this, but sometimes I probably appeared so as well. However, what made her feel so comfortable around him was probably the fact that he knew her secret and never made an attempt to take the crown for himself, despite knowing his true birth father. There are many things I am not proud of, she admitted, then. She thought of the slave masters she crucified, the men she burned, and sometimes, yes, sometimes she regretted killing her brother. I am a kingslayer myself, she mused. I never thought of it like this. Yes, we have all things we regret, he agreed, his voice distant and a little sad. His gray eyes shone now almost dark indigo in the flickering candlelight. She found herself smiling at his words. What do you regret, Jon? He moved to look directly at her and enclosed her hand carefully. She wished he would dare to do more. What was he afraid of? Maybe it would be for me to make the first step, she realized, and felt suddenly a little bashful. She squeezed his hand and gave him an encouraging smile. I sometimes wished I'd never joined the Night's Watch. I should have insisted to stay in Winterfell after my father left. Maybe I could have helped Robb to win the war. With me at his side, he wouldn't have been alone, surrounded by traitors, he admitted with a sad undertone. And Daenerys felt her heartache for him. Yet you would have never found out about the threat of the White Walkers, and the wildlings would have died joining the army of the dead, she countered. Tell me, what do you regret? He asked her then. She pondered it for a moment before giving her answer. As I said, I regret many things. For having to hurt people I wish to protect. For being forced to kill my own brother. Those things I did not enjoy. However, there is one thing I regret the most. What is it? He asked again. That I was never able to know my family. Yes, even my mad father. I never knew any one of them. I wish I could have known what it is to grow up safe and happy with a living mother and a brother who loved me. As a child, I always imagined Rhaegar would one day come back to me with Mother and they would take me and Viserys to safety. This is what I regret the most, she explained honestly. If your brother lived, do you think we would have grown up together? He asked sincerely, and it made her heart beat faster than she anticipated. It was the first time he took her brother's name in the mouth without an uncomfortable look in his eyes. I hope so. I think it would have been difficult, but I would have preferred your presence over Viserys, she replied, and found herself laughing when thinking what kind of hysterical fit her brother would have thrown if he knew about Jon. Jon was a little bit confused by her sudden change in mood. I am sorry, I just imagined Viserys knowing about you. To be honest, he would have thrown a fit. It is something I would have enjoyed watching, she continued laughing. I am not sure what kind of person I would be growing up as a prince, he said, sounding unsure. I wonder if I would have been a good person, he added. You would have been the same, I am sure. She insisted, and he gave her a warm smile in return. You have the Stark blood in your veins? It would have protected you, she added slowly, moving closer. He was handsome in his own way. She realized. Instinctively, she buried her hand in his dark raven-feathered hair. It made her feel happy that he leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Yet, he did not dare to move further than this. Daenerys felt a little frustrated by his hesitation. With Drogo and Daario, it was so easy. She could not understand it. He wanted her, she could see it in his eyes, but why did he not dare to cross this border? What does it matter? They might be all dead soon. So she decided it was on her to make the first step into the abyss. She pulled him closer and kissed him slowly. His mouth was warm and the tension in his body seemed to finally disappear as she continued to deepen the kiss. Yet, then he stopped suddenly, his dark eyes regarding with a hint of fear and doubt. What it is on your mind, Jon? She asked in a hushed whisper and a little out of breath while her hand was still buried in his soft hair. I sometimes don't know who or what I am. Before this, I was Eddard Stark's son. Now I am a Targaryen. My scars, they pain me, and sometimes I feel, what if I am only a different form of weight? Would you want this, a dead man for a lover? He asked, his voice a little hoarse and his breath fast. She was speechless for a moment. Instead of kissing him again, she put her hand on his neck. There his pulse was beating fast and steady, like a drum. You are not dead, she insisted. A dead man would not have a heart beating this fast, she added with a broad smile. His face lightened up and he pulled her a little closer. I should have died in the funeral pyre for my dead husband, but I came back. I am not dead, and I doubt a weight can feel desire, she added, dismissing this idea of him that he was a weight. It was him who kissed her this time. It was slow and less insistent like hers. She let herself get carried away by it like a ship being swallowed by the waves. She felt now more confident and sure in her actions helped him to remove the tunic he wore. The gesture obviously surprised him, but he did not resist, nor did he help her. He allowed her to do as she pleased, while he was fussing with her wool dress. Finally, his tunic was gone, and she could see the scars which he said pained him and reminded him of his death. They looked terrible indeed. No man should have survived those, but he did. For a brief moment she was too afraid to touch him, but then bravery took over and she let her slender fingers dance over the patter of skin tissue. It was coarse and surprisingly warm. It was only interrupted by him fuddling with the bindings of her dress. She gave him an amused smile and unfastened them for him. Normally she had Missandei do it for her, so she was not surprised he was not successful in his attempt. As the bindings were finally loosened, she let her dress fall to the ground with a soundless toot. She sighed a little as his hands caressed her side and shoulder. She felt even more confident now, as the cool air on her naked skin made the hair at her back stand before pulling him back into another kiss. Somewhere in between, she helped him get out of his breeches, and then there was nothing left between them. He kissed in her neck and her braids. There was not hesitation left now, and she let herself fall down at the bedding. She lost herself for a moment as his mouth went south. She felt a little surprised by this, for it was not something she expected him to do. He was always so guarded, almost so calm as a winter lake. But this was different. She pulled his hair and let herself burn. Yet it was a sweet burning devoid of pain. It left her shaking, and as he withdrew, Daenerys felt a little disappointed. She moved closer into his embrace and turned on her side to nestle against him. His eyes were now back to a storm gray color, and she decided right there that this was her favorite coloring of his eyes. She tried to memorize it. It was a trick she taught herself as a child. Whenever she faced hardships, she would try remember all the good things she experienced, like when Viserys was kind to her and told her stories of her family, when the good old knight who protected them in their youth, they got her fruitcakes, or even the little smile she received from a slave she helped. "So do you still think you are dead?" she asked, letting her hand move over the rough pattern of his chest. "More than that," he whispered, and pulled her back against him. It made Daenerys forget the throne in the south, or her dead child being a puppet to those ice monsters. Arya couldn't find any sleep. Instead, she sat until early morning, sharpening needle over and over again. Only when she felt too tired did she finally slip into sleep for a few hours. She dreamed of being a wolf running through the woods with her pack. I made her miss Nymeria even more for her dire wolf left on their way to Winterfell. Still, Arya understood Nymeria's need for freedom. "Please come back soon," she thought, and tried to find her clothes. It was a pair of dark pants and a white tunic. Over said white tunic, she pulled a chainmail skirt, which she stole from the armory. Over it she wore another tunic and her thick fur-laced cloak, hoping no one would recognize her preparations. If Jon thinks he can just go off to battle alone, he is very wrong. No, once we are away from Winterfell, I will slip away and follow them to the wall. Have you been awake all along?" Saint's soft voice pierced the silence. Horatio looked up and found her sister sitting up in bed. Due to the fact that Winterfell was quite stuffed these days, they had to share a room like in their youth. Not that Arya minded it. She was no longer the little girl who quarreled with her older sister over such simple things. "I couldn't sleep," Arya admitted, and Sansa gave her an understanding look. Then she crawled out of bed and started to brush her red hair before pulling it into a tight braid. "Did you have wolf dreams again?" Sansa asked, then, and Arya was a little surprised by her question. I never told her about this. Still, she swore to herself to be honest with her sister before coming back to Winterfell, and she intended to keep her promise. "Yes, I dreamed I was Nymeria." Sansa smiled as if she was thankful for her answer, before pulling a wool dress over her head. Then she turned her attention back to Arya and urged her to sit down. Arya knew what she wanted and followed her wish. Sansa let her fine, slender fingers wander through Auroria's dark locks. "I will braid it for you if you wish," Sansa asked, and Arya nodded in silent agreement. So, Sansa went to work. As children, Sansa often helped her mother with Arya's hair and dresses. Back then, Arya was never able to sit still and stop her fussing, but now she felt more than comfortable in Sansa's hands. "Do you have these dreams often?" Sansa continued to ask. Logia bit her lips, not quite wanting to speak about it, but she forced herself. "It started after father was killed. Brain calls it warging." Logia explained and dared to turn her head to look at Sansa, who grew a little sad at her words. Sansa tried to smile to hide her obvious sadness, but failed. Rickon and Bran also have those abilities. I wondered if Lady didn't die, if I would have those warging abilities too. Now Arya understood her source of sadness. "I am sorry," Arya said, but Sansa just kept braiding her hair. "It was Nymeria who bit Joffrey. It shouldn't have been Lady. She was such a gentle wolf." I wish Arya wanted to add, but was cut off by Sansa. "Nonsense? If I wasn't so stupid back then, none of this would have happened," she replied and squeezed Erzia's hand before looking directly at her younger sister. "I always felt guilty for what happened to your friend, the butcher boy. He didn't deserve to die like this," Sansa added in a shaky voice. And Arya realized now how much her sister had changed from the girl who wanted nothing more than to marry a fairy tale prince. "Please let us no longer speak about it. As I said, I do not wish to speak about the past anymore. However, if it eases your heart, you have my full forgiveness," she replied. Sansa hugged Arya tightly in return. "Oh, I thank you." Rudyard hugged her back, but her mind was still filled with restlessness. Morning was here, and she felt guilty for she would have to hurt her sister again. Sansa would surely blame herself if Arya just slipped away to follow Jon. Not wishing to dwell longer on this, Arya pulled on her boots instead. Later, Sansa, Rickon, Bran, Mira, and Jane had a small breakfast before stepping outside to speak to Jon. It was the first time she felt anxious speaking to Jon. Since their fight, he did not speak a single word to her. It made her blood boil hot thinking about it. Why can't he see how far I have come? I survived the South, helped retaking River Run, and helped the Dragon Queen to take down Cersei. And now he wants to send me off like a little girl. No, I can't accept this. Jon looked tense and weary as they found him talking with Tormund, who held Bran in his arms. With them were also Lord Harding and Lord Royce. Around them, Winterfell was full of bustling activity. Arya let her gaze wander over the knights, Wildens, Unsullied, and Dothraki. Most of them would march to the wall while a few hundred men under the command of Harold Harding would bring them south. If my father was still alive, he would not believe his eyes, she thought, and tried to hide behind Sansa, who made her way to Jon. Right behind her and next to Sansa were Rickon and Jane. Arisia felt suddenly a little sick and wished she could just run off and keep Jon from saying goodbye to her. "We are ready," Sansa called out to Jon. Jon whirled around and granted Sansa a tense smile. "Good," he said, and gave Sansa a small hug before turning to Arya. He sighed deeply as he saw Arisia's sour face. He tried to smile, but she ignored him. Instead, he leaned down and ruffled her hair. Rosier wanted to slap his hand away, but she couldn't bring herself to do so. She felt suddenly utterly overwhelmed by sadness. It made her heart ache and reminded her how she felt after her father's death. "I am sorry. You know Father would never forgive me if I wouldn't try to keep you all safe," he whispered, pulling Arya into a tight hug. She punched his shoulder over and over again. "I don't care what Father would think. Promise me you will not get yourself killed. I would never forgive you." Jon let her go and gave her a pained expression. "I promise," he replied, but Arya did not believe a word. "Stop lying to me," she told him in a shaky voice, which made Jon chuckle. "Let us stay here, brother. Shaggy Dog and I could help you." Rickon joined in, but Jon leaned down and patted her younger brother's shoulder. "I have a far more important task for you and Shaggy." "What is it?" Rickon asked eagerly. Jon looked briefly at Sansa and Bran, who observed their exchange in patient silence. "You have to help Arya and Sansa to take care of Bran," Jon explained, and Rickon nodded with a serious expression. "I will not disappoint you, brother." Jon smiled and turned at last to Jane, who gave Jon a kiss on the cheek. "Take good care of yourself," she told him, before pulling her hood over her face and joining Sansa. Then a moment of silence passed, and Arya wished Jon would just get over himself and call this all off. Winterfell is where they belonged. Yet from the way his face went hard and determined, she knew he made his decision. There was no turning back now. All the while Lord Harding hovered behind them as if he was waiting for his command to depart. Jon gave him a nod and offered his hand to the man. "I entrust you with my family," Jon stated, and his eyes darted briefly to each Bran, Rickon, Sansa, and at last Arya. Arya averted her gaze, looking at her boots instead. "I will do as you asked of me," Lord Harding returned, shaking his hand before calling for his squire to bring his horse. Raudia looked away as she crawled on her horse, her eyes instead fixed on the gray stone walls of Winterfell. She couldn't move more, speak a word. She felt like frozen. Only when Gendry appeared with Sir Davos did she finally find back to herself. "It is time, Arya," Gendry told her with an unusual, serious expression on his face. If it was a different occasion, she would have teased him about it. Sir Davos recognized her distress and gave her a compassionate smile. "I have seen your brother fight in the Battle of the Bastards. He is not so easily killed as you might think," he told her. The words of the old man did not give her any comfort. She had to force herself to look straight ahead and not ride back to Winterfell. Fear cuts deeper than swords, she reminded herself instead. She did not know how long and how far they traveled. She was not even what time of the day it was when they stopped and found a place with thick trees where they would be protected from the wind. To their luck, the storm even loosened up and they could see the street ahead again. Arya tried to make herself as useful as possible. Later, she found herself even tired and found some sleep. She dreamed she was a wolf again, roaming through the snow. She also had the familiar taste of blood in her mouth when she woke. Rosier did not know why, but she went to find her horse. Numeria's here was all she could think as she crawled on the back of her horse. Only the voice of Sansa stopped her from riding off. "Rhea," Sansa's voice ringed through the howling wind around ancient ironwood trees. "What are you doing?" Oriya turned around and hardened her face. "I dreamed of Nymeria. She is near us. I have to find her," she explained. Sansa looked at her in silence for a brief moment, before her expression grew more determined. Then without hesitation, she pulled her skirt up and moved towards Arya. "I am coming with you," she insisted. And Arya knew she had no other choice but to allow Sansa her will. "All right, then get up here," she told her sister and helped her into the saddle. Together they rode in silence for some time, before she felt it again. It was like a tickling in the back of her head. Then a wolf howled and was soon joined by a good number of other howls. Rosier urged her horse towards the noise. Then she saw her dire wolf. Nymeria looked even bigger, her golden eyes shining brightly in the light of the torch in Arya's hand, and with her was her wolf pack. Ainly this time it were a good 100 of them. It hit Ardia, then, and she broke into a smile. That is why she left. She brought her pack to help us. Gods, do these wolves all belong to Nymeria? Sansa asked in awe, which made Arya's smile only brighter. She is named after the Queen Nymeria. Those are her people, and she brought them to help us. No, to help Jon, Arya explained to Sansa, who kept her distance from the mighty wolf. Still, we can't stay here. We have to get back, Sansa said, reminded herself of Gendry. Gendry was waiting. We wanted to leave together. Yes, Arya agreed and crawled back on her horse. She knew Nymeria would follow at a safe distance. It took them not long until they reached the camp. Not surprised, they also found Gendry waiting for her. Arya, he exclaimed in relief. I thought you went off alone. It slipped out of his mouth, and Arya would have slapped him over the head for his stupidity. They had both agreed to not tell Sansa about their plan, and now it was all spoiled. Sansa's eyes widened in understanding. 1,000 emotions seemed to cross her face at once. But then, to Ardia's utter surprise, did she only pull Ardia into a tight hug. Go! I will cover for you. Take Nymeria and her pack to help Jon. They will need any man or wolf they can get. Jon is a fool for thinking he could keep you away from battle, she told Arya as calmly as she could muster. Arya felt her heart flushed with affection for Sansa before returning her hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she muttered, burying her face one last time in her sister's shoulder. Sansa patted her head before turning back to Gendry. And you return as well, she told him, and he gave a stiff nod. Ardia only gave a whistle, which was followed by Nymeria prancing towards them through the snow. Gendry's face paled in shock. Is this Nymeria? He asked. She is even bigger now than before. Caxlia grinned and mounted Nymeria, without another word. While Gendry looked in a mixture of horror and fear, Arya flashed him a daring smile. Now, will you come too? Lord Baratheon, she asked in a teasing tone. Of course, my lady, he replied before mounting his own horse. It was probably the first time she didn't mind him calling her a lady. Rosier then gave Sansa a last smile before riding off with Gendry at her side. The smell of burned flesh and smoke filled the air. The wolfswood was burning in the distance, and they found themselves in hell. Still, the stream of whites never seemed to stop. As men dropped dead, they arose to join the enemy's ever-growing army. Jon's sight felt blurred from the smoke and the heat. He rubbed his eyes with his gloved hand before joining back into the battle. Next to him was Tormund slashing into the mindless whites which came running at them like mad animals. Still the Night's King and his companions were nowhere to be seen. Nor was the White Dragon. They will come, Jon tried to comfort himself as he cut through 3 whites at once. One was a woman with her skin nearly gone, the other a young boy with eyes as blue as frost, and at last a young man with bloody arrows sticking out from his head. The smell was even worse, especially when they burned. In between, Jon's gaze would wander to the sky where he could see Drogon gliding over the treetops while raining a constant stream of fire on both the trees and their enemies. His flame was bright red and like a beacon in the darkness, for not even stars nor the moon were more than fading candles in the distance. Sometimes he could also see Rogzate's flames mixing with those of Drogon. It was easy to differentiate them, he realized soon. For Rogzate's flames were orange and yellow with veins of green. Hour after hour the battle raged on, and the whites came running at them. In the distance the cloud of smoke grew bigger, as storms of fire washed over the trees. Jon knew he should be satisfied that they were holding out quite well against the whites, but Bran's words were more than clear. The Night's King needs to die. And his instinct proved more than right, for suddenly a terrible coldness crept over them. It felt like a sudden snowstorm, which started to quench the storms of whirling flames littering the trees. At first it felt like small needles prickling Jon's face, but then it turned into a burning pain. Still, the worst was that they could hardly see what was in front of them. Only the mere glimmering of flames could be seen in the distance from the torches some of the men carried with them to provide light. "Jon!" he heard Tormund's hoarse voice in the distance, and then the gloved hand of said man on his shoulder. "We need to move back," Tormund yelled. "We can't face them sightless," he added, but his voice died down as the familiar screeching of the whites ringed through the air. It was not so hard to make out where they are once they were close. Their foul smell and inhuman sounds made them easy to differentiate from living humans. Jon whirled around Fasti before splitting the whites apart. Yet his mind was already somewhere else. "Where are the dragons?" "We need light," Desperately, he searched the sky, and after what felt like an eternity, he heard the flapping of Drogon's wings, which sounded almost like the crack of a whip. Jon turned around and felt for a brief moment relieved at the sight of Drogon. "It seems the dragon girl as well," he could hear Tormund's distant voice. Still, Jon found himself ignoring his words, for her behavior seemed alarming. She sat perched on her dragon, one of her hands waving right and left at them while holding tight on the other. "She is trying to warn us." Sadly, it was too late, for suddenly wild animals came rushing through the underwood. Some were dead wolves, bears, birds, and at last, the most terrible of all, large ice spiders with sharp fangs. Those were truly the most terrifying, for they cut through mortal men like butter. Jon himself nearly lost his hand as one of the spiders pierced a soldier next to him into two pieces. Trying to aid them, Daenerys Saletta, another storm of fire rained down on the woods. Still, it did not keep the creatures at bay. More and more rushed through the thick underwood, toppling over men right and left. Wild birds picked the men's faces bloody. A bear buried its teeth into a group of men as they tried to drive the creature away with their dragon glass spears. It did not matter who they were. They were dying, for those creatures would never tire of fighting like the living. Still, Jon had no time to let desperation overcome him. Angered, he slashed his sword into the next ice spider. Surprisingly, the creature reacted similar to the White Walker he once killed in Hardham. It cracked apart into 1,000 splitters of small ice shards. "Focus on the spiders," he could hear Tormund from the distance. Jon knew he was right. His sword may be of little use against the birds, wolves, or the bear, but the Valyrian steel would kill those spiders well enough. After some time, he did not know how many he killed, but soon he found himself exhausted and numb from the cold. His arm hurt, and he felt a stinging pain in his side. He nearly stumbled to the ground, but was dragged back up by Tormund. "Pull yourself together," the red-haired wildling reminded him, but Jon could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Damn you to hell, Jon," cursed the Night's King. "Why won't you come for me? In Hardhome, you did not hesitate to show yourself." Hopeful Jon let his gaze wander back to the sky again. Drogon was still there. Even Rickon was now back, his flames dancing beautifully in the sky. Then a stream of whites came over them. In their tiredness, they could not react fast enough, and were driven back. Jon stumbled over dead bodies, some of them even rising to attack him. A Deadvale knight brought his iron blade down at him, which cracked apart when meeting Jon's Valyrian steel. Tormund next to him drove a spear into a wolf which was tearing its teeth into his hip. Jon reacted quickly and cut the animal's head off in one hard cut. Tormund grabbed his hip in a painful expression, his face bloody from battle. "We need to move back," he told Jon, who knew he was right, but couldn't bring himself to do so. The Night's King needed to be stopped here, or they would be all dead. He nodded at Tormund and cut off another wolf's head. Then another and another. It seemed as if a whole pack of them came with the Night's King. It was too much, and he knew it should have been his end. One mighty bear came running at him, its teeth bared and bloody. Jon could almost smell the creature's disgusting breath on his face from the distance. All the while, Tormund was still crouching on the ground while fresh blood was leaking from the wound on his hip. Jon knew he would not be able to move away fast enough. Bracing himself, he stepped in front of Tormund, his sword ready as the mighty bear rushed at him. It reminded him of the Battle of the Bastards when the Bolton cavalry stormed at him. Back then, he did not care if he lived or died, but now it was different. "No, I can't die before my duty is over." "Get out of the bloody way," he heard Tormund's booming voice rising, and then dying in the distance as he buried his sword deep into the bear's head. Trying to keep his footing, Jon tried to put his whole weight against the struggling bear. He twisted the blade, sticking in the bear's head over and over again. Brain mass and blood splattered everywhere, but it wouldn't stop as Jon's strength was fading. "I said get out of the bloody way," Tormund shouted again, but Jon ignored him. Still, he found himself not strong enough, for the creature angled its head and whirled Jon up into the air, making him land painfully on the ground. For a moment he saw the world all black and blurred. His sword was gone, and Tormund, it should have been over, but suddenly a familiar growl made him look up in surprise. At first he thought it was Ghost, but then he recognized the gray fur and the golden eyes. Nymeria, Jon realized in surprise. Arya's wolf. Nymeria did not hesitate as she pressed the bear to the ground. Without any mercy, the direwolf tore out the bear's neck, giving Jon enough time to recover. He wished he could stay to help, but he needed to get to Tormund. Jon moved over the battlefield, stumbling over dead corpses and grasping his sword from the ground. Then he made his way back to Tormund, who was, to his surprise, standing and leaning against a half-toppled tree. Blood was still streaming from the wound, and he looked pale, but he was alive. Jon also realized now that a good 100 wolves were jumping at the whites, dead bears and wolves alike. This is Nymeria's pack, he realized in fear. No, it can't be. I almost thought, no, Arya is safe. Brushing away those thoughts and getting some of his strength back, he addressed Tormund. We need to rally the living man and hold the line, he told the wildling, who gave him a weary nod in return and dragged himself along. Daenerys felt like her head was freezing while the upper part of her body perched against Drogon felt like boiling. Down beneath she could see the movement of torches. She knew the icy storm met them hard, but it was proof of their survival. Still, despite the torches, it was hard to see what was going on among the woods. The smoke mixing with the snow made it hard to see further than a few feet. Only the flames still feasting on the trees provided some light for her. Daenerys felt useless now. She did not dare to use fire on the woods. Many of their men were overrun by the creatures, and if she would use her fire, she would only hurt them. She leaned down, urging Dragon to fly forward. The dark treetops flashed by like a never-ending sea, accompanied by the steady flapping of Dragon's wings. Rhaego was gone as well. I need to find him. Further and further she flew ahead, trying to find both her child and the Night's King. Beneath she could occasionally hear the shrieks of the whites, but no White Walker or dragon was in sight. She wanted to turn back when something caught her attention. There, in the darkness of the trees, was some movement making the twigs and leaves rustle. Maybe it is Rickon. Urging Drogon into the right direction, she ordered him to fire near the suspicious place. Drogon's flame lightened up the darkness, but what was revealed left her speechless. This was not Rhaego. The dragon in front of her had cream-colored scales and golden-colored horns and wings. It seemed for a moment as if Westeros came back to her. However, her hope was soon destroyed by the sight of his eyes. They did not flare up in their familiar golden color. Eyes like frost stared back at her through the darkness. Then the dragon gave a roar, which would have sent 100 lions running. This is truly Viserion, she realized in horror, holding tightly on Drogon's back. His roar is recognizable among thousands. She also realized that she stepped right into a trap as her own child propelled itself into the air towards her direction. And at last there was also the enemy. The Night's King. She knew it was him, for she recognized him from the stories. Brandon Stark told them. He had the face of an old man, blue eyes, and a crown of ice glittering in the fire, which was constantly growing beneath them, and spreading from tree to tree. She also knew there was no other way than to fight, and so she ordered Drogon to action. And so red flames met blue ones, lightening up the sky in bright colors. The battle continued, and to Jon's surprise, the White Walkers were finally showing themselves. One of them came at him with his crystal sword. Valyrian steel met the glassy blade, making it crack like ice.